to talk a little bit today about swooshes and swipes and swoops and all these little details that you can do in your dot art. And so I've got a few different tools available, and I've got some practice sheets that are available if you'd like to practice. But these are much easier than they may appear at first glance, and sometimes it just takes a little bit of practice, but once you get it down, it's fairly easy. The first thing that I'm going to start with, I call a swipe, and I find the easiest tool to use a swipe would be the stylus with the ball in. I've just got some leftover paint here, so I'm going to use one of these bright colors, and I've got these printed out on normal copy paper. To be honest, copy paper is not the best option for practicing. The thicker the paper or the more solid the surface, the easier time you're going to have with this, but this is what I had available, so this is what I'm working with today. One of the things to remember about swipes and swooshes and swoops is that you want to make sure there's plenty of paint on your tool, whichever tool you're using. So I'm going to dip my tool all the way in to my paint. I want it to be nice and coated. And all you do is tap down and move. I'm not altering any of the pressure, okay? So I put the ball down on the surface of the paper, and then I just move it in the direction I want it to go. So it's just tap and pull. And I don't alter the pressure at all. It's the same pressure until I'm ready to be finished, and then I lift up. And so that's one way to do your swipes. A really interesting variation on this is to alternate your swipes, and it can create a nice full line. So that is an option as well. But this tool, I think, is the easiest for me to do the swipes. And you'll find as you practice and you experiment with different tools that you have a preference for one over another, and there's not a right or wrong in dotting. Honestly, a lot of the things that we use for dotting are non-traditional. We don't have a good, because it's not a very common and popular art, we don't have a good set of art tools available for this. Another thing that you can use for a swipe is a pencil with a pin on the pen, and I have a large, here we go. I have a large one. This is just another pin that I put in there. It's just a push pin. I put it in the eraser of a pencil. This is a sewing pin, but it works the same way, same idea. I just want to make sure that this pin tip is fully coated, and it's the same thing. You just push it down and pull. And this replaces the stylus ball. So it works similarly. Same idea, same shape. Just another variation. I always make sure I clean my tools after every use, because if you let your paint dry on there, it will change the shape. Alright, the next thing I call a pin. Some people call these lollipops. There are a few different names for these, but instead of having a more teardrop shape, this has a more pin-like appearance. And so the way that I like to do these, I use the rod or the stick tool, and then I like to use a pencil. This is actually a trick that I learned from a friend of mine, Shalene, from Dotting with Friends, and she is fantastic. But using the pencil makes this super easy. You can also use the small end on one of your stylus tools. But when I do a pen, basically I dip my rod into the paint. Again, you want a lot of paint there to make a nice full dot. Sometimes, if I don't feel like I have enough paint in there, I'll add just a little more onto the dot before pulling that stem down. And with the mechanical pencil, I just pull the lead out a little bit, and then I just, because this has a nice fine pencil lead on it, it allows me to pull that down. So that's a really easy way to do the pin. And I'll show you, it's the same technique again with the stylus. So again, I use the stick or the rod, and I get a nice round ball at the top. And then you just use a nice slim tip stylus to pull that down into the shape that you want. Easy peasy. Alright, the next thing, I call these swooshes, and they're just swipes with a little bit of an angle to it. And so it's basically the same method as the swipe, you just add a little angle in there. So I place the ball with my stylus. Again, make sure you've got plenty of paint on there. Put the ball end down, and then just pull in the direction that you want it to go. That is the way I find the easiest to do the swooshes. Another method of swooshing, okay, so you can use this. Anytime you see people using a stylus, you can also use your pin tip on a pencil. And it will do the same thing. Oops, that one was a little smaller. There we go. So this is always an option. The stylus and the pin end are fairly interchangeable. Some people will use paintbrushes for their swooshes, and this is a completely different technique. Some people prefer to use the stylus, some people really like to use the brushes, but it's a matter of preference. If you use a brush, again, you're going to get it nice and saturated, and then what I do is I push the tip down to start the shape of my swoosh, and then I lighten up the pressure as I pull it downward. So you kind of just push up a little bit, oops, till you get that nice end, and then you can pull the swoosh. Using a paintbrush can create really pretty effects, but it is a little more difficult. You have to have a little more patience, and it takes a little more practice, but you can do some really beautiful things with the paintbrush. The types of paintbrushes that I would recommend for this, let me clean this off, is you want a nice long brush. The longer the brush, the easier it's going to be to make a clean line. And the thicker the bristles, the thicker your swoop is going to be, your swoosh is going to be. So you can get some that are really thin. If you have these thin ones, you're going to have really thin swooshes. If you get the thicker brush ends, you're going to have thicker swooshes. But that is worth playing with and practicing. You can create really pretty things that way. All right, the next shape I'm going to show you is a teardrop. And what I do for the teardrop is similar to the pin. I'm going to use my rod or my stick. And I am going to get a lot of paint on there. I'm going to add a dot. And then You can either use the stylus end, or I like the pencil, and then you just fill in that shape. So it's really similar to the pin, except we fill it out a little bit. But it's the same idea and fairly easy. And these can be really pretty when used in a design. So just to give you a sample, here's me filling it in with the stylus end. Easy peasy. And then the last thing I'm going to show you, I call a tadpole. And these are really just swooshes, or they're pins with a curve. But the way that I like to do them is kind of the opposite of everything else. And what I'll do is I'll get my stylus end and I'll dip it into paint. And I'm going to start by making a swoosh. And I just turn the curve wherever I want it to go. And once I get the tail, the tadpole's tail, then I go back with my rod or my stick, and I'm going to make the end. Some people call these commas. I call them tadpoles, but they can be really fun in a design, especially next to, let's say there's a large dot here. Then you can have two of these. Surrounding that dot, and it makes a really, oops, a little drip there. It makes a fun little pattern. So those are a few of the ways that you can swoosh and swipe and swoop and make all the little things. And the sky is the limit. There's no right or wrong. Don't be afraid to play with your tools and see what kind of shapes you come up with. There are even fun little options that you can get. So for example, excuse me, I have these made. These are little teardrop stamps. And so I got these to make some teardrops. And they're not perfect, but I do like them. I like the shape that they make. They're pretty consistent. So don't be afraid to experiment and come up with lots of different things. But have fun, and I can't wait to see what you create. I would love it if you would tag me in any of your creations, if you try any of these techniques, and feel free to use these practice sheets and see what you can come up with. Happy dotting, everyone!